and welcome to Evolve Beyond Borders. My name is Vivek Khanna. I am the President and Chief Client Partner here at Niamo, also the part of Screen Exchange, which is Niamo's background screening offering. So delighted for all of you here in United States and across the world to join us on today's session. Today's session is titled Navigating the Labor Markets in 2023, Insights on Talent Acquisition Challenges and Adapting the Screening Strategies. And joining me here is the Chief Marketing Officer from Informed Data, Nick Fishman. Nick, a veteran of the industry and someone I know who's always clued into what is happening both in talent acquisition, screening, within the industry and beyond. Nick, welcome to this show. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's great to be here. I really appreciate and I'm honored to participate in this. Niamo has been a great partner of ours for years, big fans of what you do, and just looking forward to participating. So thank you for everybody that has shown interest in this. I will do my best not to let you down.
Oh, no, we know that. So Nick, as we all look back for the last few years, right? The 2 years of starting of February 2020, all the way through 21 was all of the pandemic. We saw immense changes in the way talent was being acquired. Of course, a lot of boom in many areas of our economy, especially everything to do with logistics and making sure people got what they wanted during the years they were stuck at home. And of course, that led to other screening challenges. But last year, 2022, has been a way of getting back to normalcy. Things have come back. We have new strategies on how companies are working, everything from full work, hybrid work, work from home, remote work. We've heard of everything. So tell me, what do you see now in 2023, now that we've had nearly a year back from the pandemic?
Yeah,
what do you hear from the people coming in from overall in the economy?
Yeah, it's been a crazy few years, hasn't it? We went through, as you were just talking about, we went from pandemic numbers where everything just dropped off a cliff. And then before we knew it, it was a hockey stick growth within our industry for a very long time and within the entire hiring industry. What's going on now and in 2023, number one, I'm not an economist and I'm never going to try and be one, but it's something that is really interesting that I'm seeing. We've had inflation running away both here in the US and throughout the world over, let's call it at least the last 10 months or so, probably longer. I think we are headed towards a recession, both in the US and throughout the world. Whether the official definition of recession is being met, we're all seeing the impact of slowdown. And honestly, Vivek, I think what's really interesting here is that as much as we're seeing it and we're feeling it in our daily lives, it doesn't seem to be affecting the employment numbers across the board. And that's a really interesting thing to look into. I don't have an answer for why that's going on. But generally, when you see slowdowns economically, you generally see slowdowns when it comes to employment. Here's what we are seeing, though. We're definitely seeing a major slowdown in job churn. Okay. And so we're not seeing as many people being enticed by other jobs right now to leave the current job and go to another one. So that is definitely slowed down. You are definitely seeing sectors that are being more hard hit than other sectors in terms of recessionary type activities. The tech sector, for instance, we're all seeing a pretty significant slowdown and layoffs, across the board there. So, again, I wish I had a crystal ball to tell me what 2023 is going to look like in all forms. I do believe, again, we are going to see an economic slowdown. I think a lot of people in our industry are, whether this is wishful thinking or not, kind of predicting that the first half of the year is going to be very tough. And then again, the second half of the year and I, again, don't know if this is wishful thinking or there's real logic behind this, seems to be suggesting that we could rebound in the second half of the year. And so, again, I don't think I have the knowledge in that regard to be able to weigh in, but I hope they're right.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with you, Nick. Actually, I read a very interesting nomenclature. Somebody said that what we are not going to see is a recession, but a rich session. And basically, what they were trying to say is that this economic cycle, the people who are really going to get affected are the rich. One, you have a stock market breakdown. So people who are basically a lot more capital, they get affected. Companies that have debt and because of interest rates, they get affected.
Mm-hmm.
But what I agree with you, what did happen during the period of the pandemic, because of the government support, we had a case of wage osmosis. So essentially, the lower end of the wages got a hike, not so much at the higher end, right?
Yes, I agree with you on that. And that's a great insight that I had not thought about, but you're absolutely right.
Right? It was a wage osmosis that took place. And basically, and that's once the osmosis portion has normalized, that's the reason the churn has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Because average wages across the largest hiring sector, when you look at it, right, whether it's the drivers, the Starbucks people, the retail, or the fast food people, all of them have now reached the same $20 an hour wage, right? Which rose up from the $8 all the way to 20. So it took all that churn to happen. You're absolutely right. The churn would have stopped. Now the question is, while we are seeing a degradation in growth, and that's what is affecting tech. Tech has always been a growth-led sector. And if growth has stopped, automatically the tech companies who always overinvest in hiring pull back and then subsequently lay off. But the general economy, there is no shortage of demand, right? Because of lack of labor pool, I don't see the employment coming down because there aren't enough people. Right?
Yeah.
We've not had immigration, so we don't have excess supply that would lead to a higher unemployment. So you have, at least, even in the past, if you really look at it, the difference between a boom and a bust was 4% unemployment and 10% unemployment. So you're looking at 6% swing in employment. And if we've lost 6% of the labor pool during the pandemic, there is no way we are going to shift unless there's a major shutdown with the government. So I agree with you. We are going to see the effects of the correction through the first half. And that's what we're seeing as well. A little bit of timidness, flat revenue. Most CEOs are waiting and watching and saying, oh, I'm not going to invest. It's the investment that has stopped.
Well, and that makes sense for a number of reasons, whether it's because of those interest rates, right, or it's because their faith of what's going to happen over the ensuing months is just not there. And it's probably both of those things, right?
Absolutely, Nick. So I agree with you. The next 6 months are going to be a stronger wait and watch. And if nothing changes and we don't see any major fall back, as always, CEO's patience is going to lose out. They're going to start looking at their bonuses and say, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get my bonus. So the investments will come back on, right? Even at high interest rates, because it's not that it's just a matter of how you price your business model, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Hey, I'm also going back to something you just said there, which is kind of interesting to think about, and I know you're right about it, and that is as far as the demand for employees. Where I'm seeing it 100% is, you're right. There is not enough skilled labor in the market to fit all of the jobs that are out there. I think really, and unfortunately, what you see happen during these times is going to be that unskilled labor level. They get hit the hardest, I think, by something like this. So that's also something to keep an eye out for in 2023, I think.
But that's what has happened in the past. I am not sure whether in this cycle that's going to happen, because there is a minimum number of employment that is anyway needed to fulfill the daily business as usual, right? What we may not see is the growth. Now, earlier, we used to have large immigration population that needed to get employed. And since we've not had that immigration the last 2 years, we don't have that problem. So I see what you're talking about. And yes, we will see the lack of skilled labor. Now, the only contrary thing I see in the longer term affecting the unskilled part is the rise of artificial intelligence
Exactly.
and that affects and
Right.
automation that affects, which has always affected the largest amount of our unskilled population, right? Automation.
Yeah, but let's think about this too. So I agree with what you're saying. During recessionary periods and slowdowns, the smartest businesses are the ones that are going to figure out how to automate, how to
Right.
be more efficient in what they do. And who does that affect? That affects the skilled workers. And so I think you're entirely right. Like, it might take time for that to settle in, but that's a trend that's been going on for a while. And maybe a lot of companies are going to use this recessionary time period to kind of work through that solution more and more.
Correct. So, what do you see the effect of inflation on this whole talent acquisition market?
So, from an inflationary standpoint, wages are going up, and companies are struggling. I think companies struggle to compensate people properly while maintaining their cost levels. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? I think in some ways, even though we talked about the fact that job churn isn't a huge factor right now, I also think that where companies feel like they really need the talent, they're going to go ahead and overpay, which means that existing talent in some ways could be affected by that. So, all companies are seeing this impact of inflation. Everything's costing us more money. And therefore, as employers, you either have to live with the fact that they're going to be shrinking margins, which nobody is going to accept, or you have to find a way to increase your pricing as well.
Right, and you're absolutely right. Employers and companies have between this quandary of, can I increase prices and remain competitive so that I have more money to pay for higher wages, or do I do more with less?
Yeah.
And more with less has been the mantra of our country always. As an economy, as a world economy, we've always been, let's do more with less. Earlier, the more with less was more about increasing profit margins and increasing shareholder value. Now it's a matter of survival.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I do see, and I see that impact. The issue with more with less is that it takes time to come into effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't automate overnight, so you pay more. But then as you automate or you improve your business processes, you remove steps in a process, whether it is in manufacturing or in services. I have seen this, as a traveler. I'm sure you've experienced this. During the pandemic, the hotels would not service the rooms, saying because of COVID. I've seen past pandemic, hotels won't service your room anymore.
Right.
So
it's like they've adopted that as the normal standard now, right?
Right. We will service you only once in every 3 days. So they basically eliminated 2 days of housekeeping costs, which means basically now they need less housekeepers. Now, I don't know if it's because they don't get housekeepers or that's a profit. So those are the things that I think are going to affect the talent acquisition market, which now comes to my final question, which is, I think, the most interesting to the industry that we are in, which is in background screening. We earn the maximum amount of money when there is more and more employment, right? The greater the amount of hiring, the more background screens that are done, which is the traditional way. And I think that's going to be the effect, as you correctly pointed out, that we're going to see at least flat or a slowdown in the first part of the first 6 months.
Absolutely.
Then see what comes across in the subsequent year. But then, in your mind, what are some of the strategies the CRS could do in order to convince their clients about the cost of inflation, the effects that this is having?
Yeah, well, let's look at the whole picture here. Okay, so let's start with the employer level, the HR departments.
Right.
What do we know is going to happen during inflation and recession? They're going to have less resources. When they have less resources, that means either they have fewer people doing more work, or they have to find creative ways of outsourcing administrative responsibilities that they could take on during good time periods, but no longer have the capacity to do.
Right.
Now let's look at CRAs. CRAs can step up in this regard, and we saw them do it during the COVID time period. We saw them do it during the recession in 2008. What more can CRAs take off the plates of HR and talent acquisition to ensure that there are no gaps between what their responsibilities are? So I think there is a very good opportunity there. I think the other thing that I think is very interesting is that what you see generally during recessionary time periods is that the background check is under a microscope, like it is not during really good time periods. During really good time periods, you're trying to get people through the mix as fast as you possibly can. And not that you're not looking for the important things that would cause you not to hire somebody, but now everything's under a microscope. Every hire you make is the most important hire, right? Because you can't afford to get it wrong. And so I think a couple things happen in that regard. And I'm getting back to your point, I promise. So when that happens, sometimes they increase the rigor of a background check. Perhaps they're adding more services. They're paying attention to more things like they weren't before. The other really important thing that I think employers need to think about, and certainly CRAs, is that we typically see a lot more litigation during recessionary time periods because we have more people not getting jobs. And so if we take a look at that microscope analogy that I made before, it works in that regard too. So you got to be that much better in terms of your quality and your processes.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. But then as we are providers to the CRA industry, we're helping them. I know you all are one of the largest when it comes to anything to do with the domestic process. And we at Niyamo are on the largest on the international side. What do you think our value proposition could be to our customers? I hear you, right? When we look at our CRA customers, as the recession hits, they have to be more creative and offer more to their end clients, which is HR.
Yeah.
Are you alluding that they should maybe take on telling the HR department, I just won't do only the background screen, I can do your full onboarding, so that they take more off the plate? Or are you talking just doing the background screening a little more efficiently, a little more cost effectively?
Yeah, so that I'm thinking more efficiently and cost effectively. You know, I'm a big believer in kind of stay in your lane, do what you do great. If you can take on those other responsibilities and you have that, great. But if you're just adding them because you want to be a bigger part of the sequence, you better make sure you get that right. So, you know, to me, it is shifting responsibilities that were related to background screening from the HR departments into the CRAs. And I don't necessarily mean that CRAs need to fulfill that role through human beings. You know, if we can, that's great. But there are also technological advances that we all either already have and clients aren't using, or that we can develop rather easily to help assist in the process. And that's where I think real gains can be made, both for HR departments, organizations, and CRAs.
Right, you're absolutely right. That's the way we all would like to. It brings me to another topic that has been of interest in the industry, and we've all spoken about it, is continuous monitoring. And then I'll go on to another favorite topic of mine, which is social media. But let's address continuous monitoring. How do you see the role of continuous monitoring, especially coming up with the recessionary trends? And now you have a cost factor that is involved.
Yeah, this has been a phenomenon within the industry for a long time. For years, people were saying, oh, if continuous monitoring were out there, we would use that immediately. It's perfect for what we want to do. And finally, a few organizations, including Inform Data, developed solutions for continuous monitoring. Guess what? It's not doing very well right now. And it's not because we don't have good products. It's because organizations don't know what to do with that data once they get it. They're not convinced that they can take work actions with it, and sometimes they find out things that they wish they didn't. And so, in my opinion, I think that continuous monitoring has a good place in this industry. I think we need to be looking beyond the HR buyers, though, and start looking into risk management departments, where I think that they are better equipped to kind of handle that. And so I think if the audience doesn't shift, I'm not sure continuous monitoring takes off the way that we all think it is going to, and they said it might be. I think if we make that shift, I do think that this could be a rocket ship within the industry.
You're absolutely right, because I think continuous monitoring, it's at the end of the day, it's all about risk propensity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who does the risk? Now, as for the HR department is concerned, they've measured their risk towards during the hiring time period.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, okay, I've done it. I've done my risk analysis and I've handed over.
Yeah.
Who owns the risk on a continuous basis? And you're absolutely right. That's not the HR department. It's normally the security and the compliance folks.
Yep.
Many a times in certain size kind of companies, it would also be the marketing people who actually own the risk, because they own the brand risk. And brand risk doesn't only come from externally, it could come internally as well.
By the way, that's interesting that you're saying that. And it's also interesting that you threw in the carrot before about social media screening, because
Correct.
You're right. That would lead into that continuous social media type of screening at that point.
Correct. It's essentially about, are your employees the best brand ambassadors? I used to have a client, one of the largest, and this is not on the screening side, we had done other HR work for them, one of the largest beer manufacturers in the world. And they had a company policy that no employee would be caught eating at a restaurant that didn't serve their beers only.
Huh.
So you couldn't go and eat at a restaurant. Even we went out for dinners, they would walk in, the employees would walk in first thing and ask, what beers do you serve? And if you didn't serve their beers, they would walk out, right? So if you have, and it's interesting, think about it. If Pepsi was to institute that policy, how would they actually monitor it, that their employees are not swigging Coca-Cola and saying that's the best thing they've ever drunk, right?
Yeah.
There are many such competitive situations where a brand ambassadorship of your employees becomes, especially, it may not be everybody, but at least the key employees, become extremely important. And I think that's where continuous monitoring, and then similarly, social media comes into play, because then the social media becomes your continuous monitoring, tool of choice.
Yeah.
Then of course you've always looked at areas which have dealt with more vulnerable population, right? Home care associates who are working with seniors, teachers working with elementary school teachers, or teachers working in the Montessori schools, or preschool aides and attendants. Anything that where we see there's a vulnerability of the population, I think continuous monitoring is something that, if not done, I think is a disservice.
I agree. Yeah, and certainly in regulated industries, it should be, in my opinion, it should be enforced. It should be sacrosanct that every company is doing this kind of thing. Now, let's also talk about continuous monitoring, that you and I are generally having this conversation about the continuous monitoring of criminal records, right? But there's a lot of other continuous monitoring that has taken place in industries where they're regulated to do so as well, whether that's regulated drug testing, whether that's continuous driver's license evaluation, whether that is continuous evaluation of credentials. It's all working out really well there. And I'm not an expert enough to know if those things are being managed by HR or by the security, risk, and compliance departments like you and I are talking about. But I do think that with the criminal element, that it is extremely important in those regulated industries, and particularly with vulnerable populations. I agree.
Right, and of course the same thing applies to all the gig companies that hire These,
Absolutely.
whether it's like your Angie's List, who are sending people into homes. It can't be a one-time check and that's it, right?
Yeah.
A continuous. And in my mind, it's less about being able to catch. It's about a person knowing that something like this is happening, so that it enforces a self-discipline of the person. That if I was to do something, the effect is that I could get caught and affect me almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
If it catches us before the true law catches up. Now, there is the other part. Are you really guilty? Are you innocent before you're proven guilty? Yes, those things we all have to be care of. But at least at the end of the day, it's a way of protection for the overall society. So yes, I do agree with you that that's going to be a big area that we all should be looking at.
Yeah. And Vivek, look, the other thing is too, maybe you don't look at that continuous monitoring as an instant alert that I need to terminate somebody right now. It doesn't necessarily need to be that. It could just be that flag that says, hang on a second, somebody just did something. We need you to keep your eyeballs on this as the process goes through, and then you follow whatever actions you're going to take. But, again, it's going to require a culture shift in the way that these things operate at this point.
You're absolutely right, and especially as the companies, become more open to even situations like second chance hiring, this becomes the most important part. Right?
Agree with you 100%. Absolutely.
Right, so that you can then inform the society, your stakeholders, that while you're taking on in my mind, a very important task of giving people another chance, you are not doing that with taking all the risk. You are ensuring there are some risk mitigation strategies like continuous monitoring, and that would be something that would be of interest.
Right. And I think a lot of people aren't really thinking about that aspect of it, but I think it's really important. You do have all of these second chance hiring programs out there right now, and it's all well and good. By allowing continuous monitoring, it allows you to change the thresholds you have on the front end of your hiring process, because maybe you are willing to take more risk knowing that you're monitoring these people. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So tell me, Nick, if I was to go beyond 2023 and look more into the future with all these different types of hiring and work form, everything, what do you see for the screening industry? Since you've been in it, I'm sure you have the lens into all the things, and everyone who's doing something new is coming to you first.
Yeah.
At least check it. What do you see coming out there?
I mean, in the far, I don't think this is necessarily near future. I'll give you a few things. So, far future is this whole idea of owning a self-sovereign background check. I know that is unpopular among CRAs because that could actually put us all out of business at some point, or just fundamentally change the way that we do business. I do think that eventually we're going to get there. Somebody is going to own their own credentials, whether it's verifications, whether it's criminal records. It could be anything that I think there will be a shift there. So that's one thing, and I think that that's longer term. The other thing that I see happening now, and I think is going to continue, is that I think that screening is going to evolve and should, with a big emphasis on validating credentials, skills. And what I mean by that is, of course, you already know, if you're hiring a nurse, you're going to validate whether they have a nursing license. Right. But think about the people that are going to be hired in the future and are being hired right now, programmers, right? Mm-hmm. Is anybody verifying or validating that they have, like, whether it's Amazon certifications or Microsoft certifications or anything like that? I think there's going to be a big evolution in that regard. And I do know of a couple people that are trying to tackle that problem right now. I think that that's going to become a bigger part of what CRAs are doing. I think as much as we talk about verifications, whether it be employment, education, I see a growth in those areas significantly too, because of the second chance movement, where I don't think criminal background screening is going to go away, but I do think that companies are going to look at other things beyond just criminal to say that they've really done a holistic search on the individual to fully vet them out. Lastly, I think you mentioned social media before. Social media is also another one like continuous monitoring where employers really thought that they wanted it. And there's a key difference here, though. They definitely said they wanted it. And I am not convinced that they are not doing it. But I think a lot of it is being done internally, informally, and indiscriminately. I do think that there is an opportunity for a more formalized, sophisticated social media screening program to start taking place. And let's not think about it in terms of like I'm monitoring your Facebook profile to find out what you're doing, but let's think about it as an internet search kind of thing. You know, is this person communicating in a violent or menacing type of way? Are they involved in groups that would embarrass the organization had they known they'd been in there? Have they undergone certain activities that would disqualify them for employment? As you have more and more remote workers, I think this becomes more and more key to what a background screening program might look like.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, like, as you were talking, a question that came into my mind was, one of the reasons we haven't seen as much is because background screening has sat outside an applicant tracking system, right? If the applicant tracking manufacturers, the software companies, started building background screening modules inside, then this would change the industry very, very differently.
Absolutely. So, you know, they've of course built integrations with background screening companies, and I think they've done that for the very specific reason that the applicant tracking system does not want to be perceived as a CRA. Remember, there are a lot of obligations that CRAs have that, frankly, applicant tracking systems traditionally have not wanted to get involved in. This could be something that they decide that they want to do more of, where they actually want to get on the front end of this. We've seen it happen a little bit within the payroll industry, where they are now starting to get involved in screening. And I do think it's something that potentially could evolve in the coming years. There's also an interesting theory out there, and I'm not sure how well it's been tested, but we think about it a lot. And when I say we, I mean, as a CRA, when I owned my own CRA, I thought about this a lot. I know we think about it in informed data as well, is if an organization is not using a CRA, by the way, I am not signifying we are doing anything at informed data in this regard, but if they're not using a CRA and they are running their own report, does the FCRA even apply? And that's an interesting question that here in the US that we're dealing with. I'm not sure internationally how that plays, but I do think I think it's something to keep an eye on.
Well, internationally, fortunately, there are nothing as strong or robust law as FCRA. That is, the only laws that apply revolve around data privacy and data security, which are, though onerous, are not difficult to comply with. Either they clearly specify in the law, like for example, in Singapore, Japan says you cannot look at a person's record, right? Or like in case of United Kingdom, you can only look at X amount of record. Right? But none of those stop the verification processes, right? For example, reference checks have always been traditionally, even in the oldest days and time, when there's no background check, everyone used to do a reference check, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, you did written or otherwise. But surprisingly, reference checks never made it into an applicant tracking system. The same thing is what you were referring to is assessment processes, right? The skills assessment processes, never made it into an applicant tracking or an HR system. And I think that there could be a case made for that, that coming down in the future, those could be areas that would allow an applicant tracking system to be more robust.
Yeah.
So those are things that, and of course, the self-sovereignty, and my personal opinion is with the breakdown of the blockchain currency, the blockchain technology will take off, because now will no longer be obsessed with making money, but making it more efficient. So now the self sovereignty will take off, because now you're not looking at that becoming a money making process, but more about delivering.
Yeah, it's a chain of custody. It's a trust thing. And by the way, and I mean, you know this, you don't necessarily need blockchain to establish that chain of custody. It could be other technologies that have been developed. So whether it's blockchain or not, I think there's value, right?
Right. Some way of the self-sovereignty of your credentials is going to be an area that we will all see. We all believe in, and hopefully this will be bigger than either the continuous monitoring or social media, which we've seen as things that have been out there but have really not taken proper.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Nick, any last comments as we come to the close of the session?
Well, I mean, I hate to start the year on a sour note. It's going to be a tough year. We all know that. But I think that whether you are in talent management or HR, or whether you are a CRA, I think that you need to use this as an opportunity to innovate. It's what all of the best companies and all the best people do during slow time periods. How do you take your company from where it is right now and make it a stronger company, so that when the rebound does occur, you're there, you're ready to start converting on that, and you've essentially transformed what you've done, where it's not just for the rebound right afterwards, but they become sustained practices. And that's what I would encourage people to do to the greatest extent that they can during this time period.
Absolutely, Nick. If life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Let's all get prepared for that as we walk into 2023 and beyond with all these new exciting developments. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the talk, and I hope it was of value to all the listeners today to learn a little more about what 2023 has in stock for us and what's coming up new in the screening industry. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.